In this module, we are going to cover how to configure network security for Azure Storage. After completing this module, you'll be able to 1. Describe how Azure Storage firewall rules restrict access through the public endpoint. Create virtual network rules and IP network rules for approved sources. 3. Configure resource instance rules for Azure AI and PaaS services. 4. Add trusted services exceptions for Azure platform services. And 5. Implement private endpoints for fully private storage account. Let's get started. Here we are at the Microsoft Azure portal. As a matter of fact, let me start from the beginning as usually. So portal.azure.com, you could search for storage accounts here, but since we have it right here, let's just click on that. And let's continue working with the storage account that we created originally. So we're going to click on this and let's create a little bit more real estate in here. So we have been here several times before. We first created a storage account, then we configure a lot of security settings that are important to not only the SC-500 certification exam, but also in the real world. But we're here because we want to configure networking. So this is the component. And the first objective here is to describe how Azure Storage Firewall will restrict access through the public endpoint. So what that basically means is that if we go to the resource settings, this is what this is talking about here. So if we go to this, the reason why we can't see anything here is because this storage account, the networking is disabled by default. But if we go back into the networking component, if we so public access is disabled. If public access is disabled, well, the the firewall rules that we're talking about, it's basically when public access is enabled. So you would have to enable this public access, and by default, most storage accounts, it's starting to change. A lot of companies are changing that automatically, but it all depends on what the use case for this storage account is. So if this account is to be used internally by a company, let's say just your tenant, it's going to have stuff that is going to uh, services are going to use this storage account, whether it is VMs or um, Azure AI services, agents, etc. So what you may want to do is if there's any service that needs to access this from the internet, then you want to control this. You want to create a virtual network. For example, if it's to use this internally, so you would have to create either add an existing virtual network or create your own virtual network. So it's a lot of networking involved in this component. If you need to access this storage account from the internet, you would have to add at least the client where you are trying to connect from, right? Um, and so you would need to add that, or a CIDR notation or an IP address range or whatever the case may be. So yeah, there's a lot of, again, configuration when you need to allow, because imagine, how problematic could be, having uh, a storage account with, with data that it's supposed to be private, to be accessed over the internet. I mean, it's really, there's a lot of configuration, but, and again, so you would have to go through this, and in our instance, we're not too worried about that because we are going to disable internet access, right? And then we're just going to look at the, um, but it's important to, when we go to the studied guide, and again, so we are here at the configure network security for Azure Storage, and basically we are looking at this. So um, if you open the internet, so if internet it's, it's, if you can access the from the internet, obviously you want to um, create rules in the firewall that would allow, let's say, so here's your storage account. You may want to allow only from certain VNet, a virtual network, right? So you would create rules to allow access to that from certain subnets. That's where the firewall comes into place. Or if you need to access, let's say, from a public IP addresses, then you would create IP rules, um, and specify which IP you want to allow access from. Or you would create resource instance rules or trusted service. So these are the four kind of rules that you would use. And you need to understand this for the exam. So my recommendation is to come to this module and really read this and understand this. But um, in a nutshell, virtual network rules, this is for traffic from subnets with service endpoints, as we were showing there. And this is for Azure hosted workloads like VMs, app service, Azure functions. Again, so if this is a storage account is going to be used internally in a tenant, then that would be normally what you would use. But if you get traffic from a specific public IP address ranges, then you would create IP network rules. And so let's say, for example, that you have on-premises systems that need to access this storage account or internet-facing services. The rule type resource instance is for traffic from a specific Azure resource instances. For example, let's say that we need access from we need, Azure AI services need access to the storage account, or Azure machine learning workspaces, Foundry, that kind of stuff. So you would create resource instance rules. And the other type of rule is the trusted service exceptions, and that would be traffic from Microsoft platform services like Azure Backup, Azure Monitor, Azure Event Grid, and that kind of stuff. So it's important um, to understand that component over there, and this is where you would do that. Okay, that this is where you would configure that kind of stuff. But because we are um, working with a with an account that it's only to be accessed internally, then the best thing is to disable the private access. So that would be, that would take care of that. And in that case, so if you use public access, actually one of the, just to, um, not sure if this is going to be on the exam because this is a relatively new thing, but network security perimeter is the recommended. And so what you would do is that you would associate a network security perimeter to centrally manage inbound and outbound access rule. This is a resource that would have to be created first, right? And So if we look at, let's see, so it would look something like this. You still need to use private endpoint, but the main idea is that both inbound and outbound access are denied. There's completely denied. So you create a network security perimeter, which is based on profiles, right? And this is kind of a centralized network isolation environment, if you want to call it. And, because that way, you prevent data exfiltration because there's no access to the internet in or out. Everything is within the Microsoft backbone. And it's basically secure service to service communication. In other words, let's say that Azure AI services, Microsoft Foundry need to access the storage account. So you have the AI services accessing the storage services. So it's within Microsoft. It could be a VM, it could be an Azure function, a web app, whatever the case may be. Azure Monitor, right? So, but everything is control within that environment. So that's what that would be. And again, this is the other component that so you can go right from here or just see the configuration if it were enabled. This is the same thing that we just saw. But the next piece is a private endpoint. And, you know, basically what a private endpoint does is, uh, you know, allows you to access your resource by establishing a private connection to a virtual network, avoiding the need to expose it to the public internet. So it's basically a private IP address that is used only within the Microsoft backbone. So there's no access to the internet at all. So, and this is what definitely you're gonna be tested about that in the exam. So configure. Oh, actually, this is the private endpoint piece, right? So here you have a storage account. It has a private IP address. There's no public endpoint, no public IP address. So internet is completely. You need to disable internet for this to work. And so you have this is the Azure Virtual Network. So the both the client and the uh, the subnet, the private endpoint, they needs to be on the same subnet, right? So you get a client access a private assigned IP address, and then you would create what is called a private link between the Azure network and the storage account. So basically meaning that, and this is a little bit confusing because this is all Azure. This is all Azure. Now this is the Azure Virtual Network where you're trying to connect. But the storage account doesn't necessarily need to be on the same. If it's on the same, fine. But let's say that this storage account is on another network. You create a private link between this virtual network into the storage account, and then you establish a private endpoint. So, really important to understand how this works because you're going to be tested about that. Uh, so, I would highly recommend coming over here and reading um, that information over there to prepare for the exam. All right, so that's another one. When it comes to network routing, this is not necessarily about, well, yes, there is some aspect of cybersecurity because what network routing determines is how to route your traffic as it travels from the source to its Azure endpoint. Microsoft Network Routing is recommended for most customers. Obviously, when you disable internet, then that's not an option. So, uh, but in a highly secure environment, if there's no access, there's no need to access that storage account from the internet, then of course you want to disable that. And the other piece over here is the custom domain, which is not necessarily networking feature, and we're not gonna get into that now. But basically, those are the um, those are the different pieces on the networking side that that you need to go to over here. So configure virtual network, configure the resource instance rules. A lot of the stuff is those rules that we were talking about, and basically that'll do it. So that's it. I mean, it's not a long module, of course. A lot of the stuff have been taken care of, but really important that you come over here and read into these documents. Okay, and therefore, so we are at um, so we are on course 4 of this certification exam, and so uh, let's see, we are here. Configure network security for Azure Storage. The next module, it's going to be um, implementing Microsoft Defender for storage. Okay, this is what we are going uh, to cover next. That's all. Um, for now, as I said, short module. I mean, there is a lot to networking, but remember that this is a cybersecurity class, so we're just concentrating on uh, the the components of this part that are related to networking. And we already talked about managed identities, and so there's a lot of other pieces that we have discussed already. That's all for now. Hope to see you on the next module.